I'm Jessica Love, the Associate Executive Director for Prosperity Indiana, and today's host of this episode. I'm joined here by Kathleen Lara, Prosperity Indiana's Policy Director. And the backdrop for today's discussion is the inauguration of the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump. The focus of our conversation will be on the appointment of neurosurgeon and former GOP presidential candidate Ben Carson as the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. Because the oversight and policies of HUD are critical in importance to most, if not all, of Prosperity Indiana's membership, Kathleen is here to discuss her personal takeaways from the confirmation hearing held last week. Kathleen, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to have this discussion today.
Absolutely. So to start off, let's discuss Ben Carson's experience. There was a lot of uncertainty about what to expect and going into the hearing, given that Dr. Carson's professional background is in medicine rather than having a history of government service or work in the housing industry. So what did you learn from the hearing about his response to this concern?
I think he came well prepared for this question. Certainly a lot of the discussion from the advocacy community was, there's no line of history that we can point to as to his positions on a lot of the different issue areas that HUD oversees. So we don't know really what to expect. What he did point to was his experience growing up in poverty, having housing insecurity, being a constant source of anxiety when he was a child for him and his family. Then he talked about how he relied on his family's strengths and different educational opportunities to create, the successful professional life that he did create. But he also talked a little bit, which was an interesting intersection, was the housing and health and how they fit together and how they're important. So he was able to segue his experience in Baltimore at Johns Hopkins University and how he talked about lead abatement, how he talked about asthma, a lot of the different issues that inner cities struggle with in particular, and how the healthcare determinants are often related directly to the housing environment. So he relied a lot on that. He also pointed to his experience in serving on the boards of Kellogg and Costco, and saying that CEOs regularly don't have the traditional experience in every line of business, but that they can bring in the right people and know how to oversee management, and that was critical for leadership at HUD. So I thought probably the most compelling for our membership was the social determinants of health and housing being a part of that, being a compelling part of his opening foray into the hearing, and why he felt he was qualified for the position.
So another concern going into the hearing was his view of fair housing.
Right.
One of the only statements on housing policy that Dr. Carson had provided prior to being nominated was in a 2015 op-ed in the Washington Times while he was a candidate for president, where he characterized the Obama administration's efforts to address housing discrimination through affirmatively furthering fair housing rule as another, quote, failed socialist experiment of the government. I know a number of senators expressed concern about his prior statements and what that would mean for fair housing under his leadership of HUD, if confirmed. Can you discuss how he responded to those concerns?
Absolutely. I think this was the one thing a lot of senators clung to, so it was really all we knew about his position regarding housing and HUD. So this was something that he was asked repeatedly about, and in many cases, senators acknowledged that his position that he held in this confirmation hearing would be his position of record. So what he made as a statement during a candidacy, maybe one thing, but what he says now that he's in the running to lead the department will be what he's held to if he were confirmed and to come into office. So what he largely walked back some of the more inflammatory parts of that statement to say he thought the Fair Housing Act is one of the most important pieces of legislation in preventing discrimination. Regarding the affirmatively furthering fair housing, he still, I think, identified with parts of what he was saying before, and that he didn't feel that top-down regulation. So things that were coming down from Washington, D.C. to local communities was always the right way to address discrimination. He was asked specifically about LGBTQ discrimination, and he said he absolutely would uphold efforts to fight discrimination in housing. So I think he stepped back largely from the more inflammatory parts of the statement that he made as a candidate into talking more of his tone of the leader of an agency that would be responsible for overseeing this. So I think a lot of people's concerns were alleviated somewhat. I think some remains to be seen what really plays out.
So what were some of the broad themes that maybe you drew from the hearing that might indicate, what Dr. Carson plans to accomplish as head secretary, should he be confirmed?
So I think one of the more important things that he did say is kind of pulling from his concerns about his experience or lack thereof in housing was that he wanted to do a listening tour. He wants to go around the country, meet with localities, meet with housing residents, and to talk about the issues that are concern to them. What I was very encouraged by on behalf of our members was his understanding that housing is essential. Having a strong housing basis and foundation was essential to providing other economic opportunities. So he pulled in themes of providing educational opportunities, work training opportunities, looking at housing, as he said, as a holistic view. So as he said he did as a doctor, looking at the whole view of the patient, he thinks that there are better ways to pull in economic opportunities to housing. So we can probably look for some of those. In terms of some of the more nitty-gritty specifics that are of concern to our membership from a budgetary standpoint, he did say that he thought rental assistance was necessary. So he vowed to continue to fight for the HUD budget, even though he also said he wanted to cut red tape, and he also wanted to reduce non-defense spending overall. So we don't know exactly where that will be, but he was asked specifically about homeless resources, vouchers, and Section 8 more broadly. And he said he did see that it was essential to making sure that people had other opportunities before you pulled a rug out from under them in terms of cutting budgets for housing stability. So I think we do have some indication that there will be a maintenance of primarily the programs that we've seen so far, but maybe some inclusion of work training programs, things like that. He also talked a lot about lead abatement, how that's going to be increasingly part of his focus, and some of the healthcare tie-ins. So some of it will remain to be seen once he does the listening tour, but I think we got a little stronger sense of where he sees the agency going.
Anything else that you might have gathered in terms of where the budget might go? I know you spoke to some of those things.
Yeah. So while he offered support for the HUD budget, he was asked very specifically if he would protect it. I think he also shares the president, now I was going to say president-elect, he's now president as of today, shares the president's view of cutting the spending overall. So given the vast budget that he would oversee at HUD, we'd have to see where those programs, where that kind of lies, since they have, jurisdiction over FHA, we have, CDBG, we have home, we have all these various things. He said we needed to see what programs were working and what wouldn't, and cut where we need to. So we have no real barometer of what he sees as not working. We just have heard so far that he's going to take kind of stock of what is going on, where the budget needs to be cut, where it needs to be protected. More broadly, President Trump has kind of had through his transition team, the Heritage Foundation, working on a report about budget cuts. We didn't see anything specifically so far related to HUD. I'm sure there will be items, but there was some discussion of violence against women programs being cut. So we're going to watch that pretty closely, and we'll make sure that our members are aware of that, should that come to be in his budget request.
And then in terms of what impact Carson's appointment might have on Indiana, Indiana has one senator that sits on the banking committee. Can you share any state-specific questions about housing priorities and HUD that were asked and responses he had?
So I was out in D.C. in December and talked to Senator Donnelly's staff. Senator Donnelly sits on the committee, and we discussed some of the priorities that he was thinking of bringing up, and encouraged a couple of different directions to go in questioning on behalf of our membership. And two of them he asked directly related to what we had discussed. One of them being a continuation of commitment to homeless veterans. So Senator Donnelly has long been a supporter of service members, so we knew that he would probably have that focus. So he asked specifically about commitment to programs like HUD-VASH and trying to make sure that supportive housing programs for veterans, in particular those disabled veterans, those maybe battling addiction issues, would continue on.
What opportunities do those, listening from Indiana, have to engage with your work in terms of legislative action?
Right, so we have our policy advocacy page of the website, but probably the most imminent thing that our members can do to take part in our legislative action would be to register for our State House Day, which is on Tuesday, January 31st. You can register by going to prosperityandaction.org. And so we're setting up member meetings so they can meet with legislators, talk about our top priorities at the state level, and then also stay engaged with us throughout the year through our blog, through emails to me, and through our number of our affinity group meetings. And we can make sure that any way we can provide assistance in meeting federal legislators and administrative officials, we would be able to make those connections. We're happy to do so.
Great. And thanks, Kathleen, for sharing your insights today. I know that our members, especially those who couldn't watch the hearing for themselves, will appreciate your reflections, and then hearing your prognostications about the future of HUD under Carson.